Welcome to the One Step Ahead series, part storytelling, part podcast, and entirely a celebration. This project is a way to honor the wise beings and medicines that serve us in creating a life that is aligned with the unique beings we are, and the values that connect us to ourselves, to others, to our precious planet, and energies in the universe. You're invited to share in the intimate conversations that arise when we ponder and explore the questions: what does living in alignment feel like? What does it look like? How do we find our way, and who are the guides that can help us discover and deepen our understanding of ourselves? If you're a curious seeker, if you've known that something about your circumstances is not quite the right fit and wondered, what else is there? This is a place to open, expand, and explore. One step ahead of our past, of where we've been, one step closer to where we want to be, where we're meant to be, finding alignment. Always, still, putting one foot in front of the other. Welcome back to our viewers and listeners who have been part of the One Step Ahead series already, and welcome to everybody who's new. We're so excited that you found your way here. My lovely co-host, Sabrina. Hello, friend.
Hello.
I always love when I get to be in the online space with Sabrina because the colors of the artwork, your paintings, all three created originally by you, as I understand it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
There's actually a piece on your website that I am just smitten by.
Which one?
Everyone. I don't know that it's called Heartbeat, but it is
the pulse.
the pulse.
Yeah.
Yeah. And welcome, Ocian Ward. I'm so glad that you actually included your last name because in my mind, of course, you are Ocean Sound Medicine Music. And I am so grateful to have you in this space with us. I'm really excited to have the opportunity to spend some time with you because we spent 3 very intense days together in the fall of 2022. Life-changing days. And pardon me, folks, while I reach, I don't have a lot of pictures in my office, but I do have this picture. And it is a group photo of all of the incredible beings and facilitators who were part of tending the inner garden in September 2022. And that was the first retreat of this nature that I've participated in. It was a 3-day residential retreat and really was transformative. We got to sample so many beautiful practices and opportunities to build connections with one another and to really be held in whatever we brought into that space. And then we were offered the gift of medicine and Ocian, the sound baths in this really beautiful space. It's great. Actually, I haven't paused to think about all of the details in quite a while. And even as I do, I can sort of slip back into that energy. And actually, as I was preparing for our call today, for our summer season, I've usually been putting on like super bouncy summer music so that I can kind of get high vibe and high summer energy. And I have been really grateful today to just be savoring this really soft, gentle, sweet energy. And I think that is largely because that is the energy that I have felt in your presence, in conversation with you, and it feels really natural and comfortable in my body. So even though we are, in the fiery season of summer and a lot of what we're going to talk about will probably be, relating somatic practices to alignment and what that looks like, and particularly for you, Ocian, in living a purpose-driven life. So the energy feels just right. A little bit of a languorous conversation today.
Oh, beautiful.
A little bit more about Ocian. I'm not going to do it justice. I think I've given a little bit of an introduction. Please bear with me while I read a piece off of Ocian's website. Ocian of Ocian Sound Medicine Music is an expanded state guide and established sound practitioner. offering to audiences all across Canada, the United States, and beyond. Ocian has dedicated her life to being of service and walking a path of remembering how to be in right relationship with the earth and all beings in this realm. She started this path 13 years ago with sound and energy work, then realized she wanted to make an impact with people and began learning Somatic breathwork and animism rituals from Celtic, Andean, and Hawaiian lineages. Ocian has been sitting with plant medicines for 10 years in the Shipibo lineage. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. She's dedicated to creating trauma-aware, safe circles, ceremonies, and experiences for people to explore and heal themselves. And I could go on, but I'm not going to. For anyone who would like to hear a bit more about that story, please visit oceansound.com/bio.
Mhm.
Yay.
Thank you so much for having me. What a beautiful welcome. I feel so glad that I love that you have that picture on on your desk. That's really sweet. Aw.
The guests for One Step Ahead in 2024 are a very carefully curated collection of practitioners who have really, I, I don't think it's hyperbolic to say have helped steer the course of our lives.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And you are a really big part of that for me. And oh my gosh, I feel like I could take a conversation in so many different directions. I'm so excited to be sharing this with you. So we'll have to find time to catch up elsewise. Because we really are here today to celebrate you and the role you've played in helping me find my way to recognizing alignment and being able to choose to create as much as possible an aligned life and to learn to feel into and differentiate alignment from misalignment and those moments in our lives where things are feeling maybe a bit on autopilot, maybe a bit uncomfortable, maybe a shitload uncomfortable, to be very honest. And I would really love if you would share with us a little bit about your perspective on alignment and how it relates to your path of finding your way. And it's so funny to say that now, of course, right? Because you've got more than a decade, well, more than a decade, going on to at least two, I think, of working in this space and really nurturing and developing a deeper craft as a healer and practitioner. And would you just maybe share a little bit of that journey and how you've been able to recognize what's feeling aligned and what you're choosing to follow?
Mm, mm. Wow, thank you so much. Yeah, I feel like I've, since I was a little girl, I have been on this path of, self-discovery and curiosity about just simply what it means to be human. And so that's a really big driving force for me is like, what does it mean to be in a human body and how do we navigate this experience in a good way, in a good way, in a well way. And there wasn't really a lot of conversation in my early years in my family around that question. And so there was, the questions popping up, but there wasn't really a lot of answers. And then I was in the Catholic faith for quite some time in my early life. And so at least that brought in the conversation and a little bit of community for many years around, conversations of the mystics and the mystery and practices, rituals to sort of satiate some of those questions that I had. And then many, many years later, I started recognizing that no longer aligns, that no longer, satisfies that question. There was so much more that I was discovering about myself. And once I started realizing that there was so many other practices, rituals, teachers, elders, all these things, I started really allowing myself to sort of be the spider web, so to speak, and really reach out And I found myself in sweat lodges, I found myself in drum circles, in pipe ceremonies, so a lot of the indigenous practices that, again, were very, very earth-based, and there was a lot of like connection to the great mystery and spirit, but there was so much there that connected me also with the earth and my body and these types of things. And all the way along, I feel like it wasn't actually even a choice. Looking back on it, I I followed this path, and of course got a lot of kickback from my family, and a lot of charge happened for many years of my life. But I think that there was certainly a choice of dedication to that curiosity and the commitment that I had to self-discovery and different modalities of healing and learning about myself. But also there, it almost wasn't a choice. It was just like I needed to go down this path. It was like some deeper part of me was like, no, you're meant to be over here. We're gonna go over here because this is the life that, for lack of a better term, that I agreed to beyond this physical form. So we'll leave that there. That's getting way out there. But yeah, it was definitely a dedication, a commitment, because there was a lot of this, going into this path. But what I realize now is like I didn't actually have a lot of choice in it. I just knew that I needed to carve out my own path and find ways to connect with people and connect with myself and connect with the earth. And so I'm grateful that my story is like this, right? My path wasn't very linear at all, which I'm sure is very common. But all the way along, there was almost these breadcrumbs to say, okay, keep going down this way. And there was a lot of teachers that came, a lot of books that came, and a lot of people that, really were the inspirations to keep me moving forward in a less sort of carved out path, so to speak, especially in this culture. So very, very grateful for all those people and the teachers and the rituals and the lineages that I got exposed to for a lot of years in my 20s and 30s. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Listening to you describe that journey, it sounds as though you arrived on this planet with an inherent sense of trust in your intuition.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, actually. There's a number of of pieces there around trust that it's kind of like, well, I have no idea of like what I'm even trusting, but I just there's something that I just know. And so yeah, there's a lot of trust there. And over the years of going deeper into that practice, really, I recognize that I have a lot of distrust in life itself, because it's been so effortful, I think, to walk this path. And yeah, so it's both, right? But also that's where the healing is too, is that practice of coming into trust, and again, deconditioning myself in a lot of ways around my beliefs and my thought patterns and what I believe to be successful and what I've been told that is success and all these things. So I think a lot of it is deconditioning, and yeah. But yeah, a lot of trust too, I guess.
I love that you use that word, because I think for so many of us who are on this path, it is something that comes into our field at some point where we recognize we're being called down this path. But in order to fully step on it, you do have to decondition yourself.
Yeah.
And there is so much resistance to it. There's so much, what's the right word? Like almost discontent in the fact that, like, why do I have to go do all of these things? And you said something important that I think is really good to highlight. You said it wasn't a choice for you. What were some of the signs that your body told you this wasn't the right path? Like when you were exploring different modalities or different ideologies?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. I want to say, for me, I'm very, very feminine in this way, that it was a really deep felt sense Like my body actually wouldn't let me when I was in certain jobs or in certain situations, or, you know, doing certain other types of work that wasn't on this path. It was a very felt sense of, first of all, I don't enjoy this. That's a big piece, right? For me is like, and this was actually came through in a plant medicine journey many years later, that joy is a code, and joy, like, we have to unapologetically follow what brings us joy as we move forward in these evolutions, right? Yeah. Yeah, I wrote that one down too. And so even many years before that, I started to recognize, like, wow, this is not, I am not having a good time here. And sort of tried to push through a number of different things, and then I started noticing my physical body would get sick a lot more often. I would start having like irritations more quickly, and, you know, reactions more quickly in my emotional mental space, and irritability. And it was definitely a felt sense, you know, when I was not in alignment, when I wasn't, you know, on my path. And that's been sort of a big compass for me, even unconsciously. It's been a big sort of north for me that I just have to follow, even if I don't necessarily know why. So it comes back to that trust. It comes back to that practice of trust. But I talk a lot about, as a sound practitioner, this piece around the practice of listening. And I think there's so much that we are essentially cut off from in our bodies when we don't tune into the felt sense of what we're listening to in our minds, in our bodies. You know, it's not just with the ears, it's with our whole, you know, felt sense of our human body. And there's so much information that comes through, and so much, again, so many people have been conditioned to bypass that information. And I speak a lot about it, because it's like, that's actually, when we bypass all of that information, there's so much of the human experience that we're missing, first of all. But also, that information is actually a code. It is actually our compass, you know. And it takes a lot of courage to follow that. It really does. And I have compassion for when we feel stuck or blocked in some way. And I think it's an essential piece of these practices of, you know, being in alignment, is this practice of listening to what feels good, what is truth in my body, what does that feel like in my body. And so many years later, of course, I started bringing in the soma, the body based practices, to not only learn for myself, to bring in that wisdom of the body, but to then eventually bring it forward to teach it to my clients and participants and things like that. So yeah, it's a big part. And, you know, now, of course, looking back, I'm like, oh, that was what I was like unapologetically saying, no, this doesn't feel right. I'm okay. Moving on, you know, not apologizing for it. And the process around it, of course, there was a lot of fear. And when I felt that, you know, pushback from my family or colleagues or whatever, it was like there was a lot of pushback there. And that's where the courage, that's where the strength and, you know, the fortitude comes in, of like, I have to, I'm not sorry for following this, you know, this, whatever it is, intuition, or just this knowing, this deeper knowing around who I am and what I'm doing here. And I'm still discovering, you know, I'm still learning, still on this crazy path, you know. but it's definitely been a big portion of who I am and what I'm doing here. And yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I love how you are proof, particularly in my world, but proof of that, trusting what you're feeling called towards, even when there's challenge involved, has so many rich rewards, as far as feeling that one is really being authentic to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
little parts of me felt envious almost listening to you, and then also kind of amused because I at 49 feel I've made good headway. But even last night, I sat down and I did homework for an hour and a half, and all I did was work on identifying my values and asking, I feel this feels like it's a value. Okay, well, what is it about that? Why does it feel like it's a value? What does it do in your life? How do you know when you're living in a way that creates more of that is aligned with those values? And so
Mm.
I feel like my knowing is quite clear, and I'm getting really good at trusting, and I still have a long way to go with deconditioning.
Yeah, you're definitely not alone there. But yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's that awareness. I would like to take an opportunity to share a little bit of a story on the theme of joy is a code and finding joy. When I've shared parts of my story in the One Step Ahead series so far, I've really been focused on the work and teachers that were part of my life in 2022. No, the work was 2023, just passed away November of 2022. I was in retreat with you, Ocian, 2.5 months prior to the death of my sister, who was my soul sister, my twin flame. We were each other's everything. And in some ways, it feels a little bit ironic in the level of it feeling okay. So this is a sensitive story, and I recognize I'm starting to trip over my words. So I'm just going to catch a little bit of a breath and backtrack. During COVID times, the height of COVID times, I was really struggling in my role as a government employee for all kinds of reasons. And after more than a decade of not being on antidepressant or anti-anxiety medications, I went back. Actually, I went on 2 prescriptions at once, which was kind of unheard of for me. And I was grateful for that because it enabled me to make peace with the world, with my conditions, with how things were. And I was very disappointed to be what just felt like flatlined all of the time. And so grateful not to be dipping into the severe lows, but also really missing the natural, beautiful highs that come with the joy of living. And for me, that was not feeling aligned. It felt like I was medicating my system and my body in order to tolerate conditions that I knew were not healthy for me.
Yeah.
And so I made the choice that I was going to work more on my conditions and leave the prescription medications behind with a lot of support so that I could do a little bit of titration with, okay, well, how can I feel? I feel stronger after being on the medicines for a while, and I want to feel more. I genuinely want to feel all of it and practice developing skills and muscles of equanimity so that I could be curious and hold space for all sides of those emotions. And for most of my life, I was considered an Eeyore because I was very, very sensitive, and I would call out the crap when everybody else seemed to be pretending things were all great. And even if it was just me who wasn't feeling great, I would, express that until I learned that in a lot of environments that was not welcome. And in fact, it did me a disservice because then I would be often isolated even more, which is why Jess and I were such a magic, beautiful, sweet, dysfunctional little unit because she was very similar. So when we connected as teenagers, we saw ourselves in each other, and right away we just fully embraced and accepted all of that. The summer of 2022, Jess and I went on this fantastic road trip, our sister spacation across the province and back. And we went and we visited our parents and stopped at 2 different hot springs. It was glorious. And I remember saying to my mom, with just so much sweet joy that I felt like I had found inner peace. I said, I'm not happy all of the time, but I can be peaceful with what is all of the time. And then
Mm.
5 weeks later, I sat in retreat with Ocian, and I was the epitome of joy for 3+ days. Friends that I shared the weekend with, you know, in our closing ceremony, nicknamed me a joyous little fairy. And the one that just struck me the most was Priestess of Joy. And
Love it.
that's what I brought home with me. I get shivers just thinking about it. And I think that's why that picture is so potent for me, is because it wasn't just that I had a joyful afternoon or a really great weekend. I was full joy, head to toe, inside out, vibrating to the degree that everyone around me, all they sensed was joy and love and gentleness. And then 10 weeks later, Jess died.
Mm.
And again, that's whole other stories that go along with this, but having that embodied sense of how joyful I knew I could be, what level of joy existed for me, I think provided a lot of the motivation and the strength. And I really love, Ocian, you used the word fortitude,
Mhm.
to trust and have a little bit of faith to keep going anyways. Not in a desperate pursuit of getting back to that place, but just of knowing that there's so much that I can tap into, that it's worth trying to find it.
Mm.
Aw,
Thank you, everybody, for
Yeah.
hearing that, for hearing that. It was important for me to remember that. And I've never felt anything like it in anything more than the beautiful natural doses, you know, when you're having a great big belly laugh with somebody, or Mother Nature just completely takes your breath away in all of her exquisiteness. But when I pause and I think about it, I can feel into that. And that's really the power, part of the power and magic of somatics is, and when all of these things work together, right? Choose the thoughts, choose the memory, and feel into what it felt like.
Mhm.
Before we proceed with more questions, friend, you have your whiteboard behind you, and I've been forgetting to ask you to share what's on your whiteboard. Would you please share with us today?
Yes, today's
Our
whiteboard.
wisdom interlude.
Yeah, we should add some special music there. When you accept that the work is never done, you become free.
Ooh.
Mm.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, right? So good.
Yeah.
which is funny because Ocian, you said something that really tapped into that. You said, you know, I'm going to be on this winding road forever. And I think that's so true. And that's why I wrote that quote, is because so I've been there on the struggle bus of like, why the fuck do I have to keep doing this goddamn fucking healing? And I say it just like that every time. And the moment I realized why and the purpose and how it's just the journey, it never ends,
Mhm.
was a moment where I was like, wow, I feel like a weight has been lifted off of me. Yeah.
It's like embedded into the human experience, and a lot of a lot of us have this perspective that like, okay, I'm going to get there, and then once I get there, I'm going to feel good and I'm complete. And again, it's very much a, dare I say, an illusion of maybe some of the some of the unwell perspectives around how we live, and the culture that we live in. And again, it's nobody's fault. But again, I really appreciate that, because once we just like arrive exactly where we are and recognize that we have this journey ahead of us, And we also have this journey behind us that we've, gained and accumulated wisdom and knowledge and understandings and all these things. Is we can land here, we can be here exactly where we are, and we're not necessarily needing to strive or reach or but this, and then but this thing, and this experience, and this next thing. It's like we can just really be exactly where we are in the windiness of of all of life, and that can be beautiful, and that can be full of grief all the same, right? Like both exist in all of these moments. And so there's a lot of, I guess, surrendering to that.
I love your wording, the unwell perspectives. That was such a gentle and nice way to
Yes, I'm there's a lot of gentleness happening.
I would not have put it that way, but I really, really appreciate those words and will use them in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
Delicately subversive.
That is great. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Recently, an insightful person shared as well that this version of you is now it's their turn to do what they're meant to be doing, and all of those earlier versions couldn't have had all the fun with the healing, right? They just help prepare the version who's here today for what she needs to be doing today, and preparing for she who will be tomorrow.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And I want to just say too that again, like that, just that story that you shared around, feeling that joy at the retreat, and then coming to 10 weeks later, having to move through that. I want to say that there is that preparation, even though you didn't know that that's essentially what you were preparing for. We never know, right? But those moments of elation and bliss and capacity that we have to be with that joy is also in preparation for the depths that we inevitably, right, the tides, the rising and the falling, that is life itself. It's like elation, and that joy was that potential preparing for the the moving down into the depths of that incredible grief. And and what a gift it is, to be able to experience those highs and the difficulties and the hardships of the lows. There's so much there. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. Thanks for those thoughts. It's only just occurred to me in this conversation, actually, how I think that's why irony came to mind for me earlier. Is I made the choice, conscious choice, I want to feel all of it. And then in such a short period of the time, the universe said, here you go, sweet one, you're getting what you asked for. And holding space for that joy and recognizing it, I can't help but think that really did help build capacity for holding grief in a new way.
Yeah. I want to say that there's a direct, maybe correlation is not necessarily the right word, but I've read this book so many times, and this author is an Indigenous author, and he's local. I think he's passed now, but his name is Richard Wagamese.
Oh,
yeah.
So good.
And I'm so sorry. It also him. But this book that I'm actually referring to is Martin Prechel, who is also an incredible author. And anyway, Richard Wagamese also, yes. These two, actually, I always get them confused because I found them at the same time, and they both are very incredibly well written and poetic, and such a beautiful description of the human emotion and grief. And so this book that I was actually meaning to talk about is The Smell of Rain on Dust. And and it just the title is just, it says so much. And so Martin Prechel, and this whole book is on grief, and how oftentimes, this culture, we don't have a lot of space for grief. We don't have rituals around grief. We just
Sure.
Yeah, we just keep going and have a moment, and then life goes on. But in a lot of other cultures, and in particular the indigenous culture of these lands here, there's a wide spectrum of different rituals and different practices and understandings of the importance of spaces to hold grief. And at one point in the book, he talks about the expression of grief, the tears, the keening, the grieving process itself is actually an expression of what we find beautiful in this world, in this life. And so I've experienced it myself, where grief is it's in the beauty of the sun setting or the sun rising. There's so much there that is so incredibly beautiful that my soul is just like, wow, this is so beautiful that it hurts. And so yeah, it's just such a beautiful way of looking at grief, and actually welcoming it into the human process and experience in a deeper way. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. It reminds me of a quote that I often repeat for people who are in grief is just unexpressed love.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
a very similar
Yeah.
context around, we have so much love, and it doesn't even have to be for somebody who's passed. Just like you said, it can be for an experience or something we wish we were able to provide for a person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that these spaces that I've been called to create is, I feel a little bit selfish in that, is that I actually needed these spaces. I needed these spaces to explore and discover myself. And so I think that that's one of the reasons why I have found this path and am doing this work in the world, is so is so I have these spaces, but we can also come together to, language and be vulnerable together and lean into one another and find these safe spaces where it's actually okay to experience these deep levels of grief and pain and suffering, but also these ecstatic explorations of what it actually means to be in joy and bliss and on this path of alignment and purpose and all these things. And then of course, like, what's in the way of that, right? A lot of these tools and a lot of these pieces that I work with, breathwork and drum journeys and sound, and then of course, many years later adding in the plant medicines, it's all sort of, for me anyway, with this sort of underlying intention and foundation of what is our purpose, like what are we doing here and what does it mean to be human, and let's create a safe space where we can actually discover and explore together and find these places where we can align and we can be with this incredible vastness of the human experience. um, so I'm really grateful for this work, and I'm very much a student of it still. I have a lot of mentors, I have a lot of teachers that are both human and non-human. And it's been such an integral piece of my own journey, and then the spaces that I offer and curate together with people is with this foundation of wow, there's so much to learn. There's so much to discover. And being together, I think, in a really safe, but also authentic and really, a really deep way is is something that's like I'm so passionate about. I want to get to know people. I want to get to know myself in reflection and in relationship with other people in the land. And yeah, and so finding my way there again, it's like it's a path not well carved out in this culture. And so again, gratitude for the many people and the many plants and lineages that I've sort of found on my path and still discovering, that have supported me in my courage, I would say, to go out in this way and find these places that really resonate with me. Yeah. Hmm.
I am thinking about Sabrina and wondering, Sabrina, how much you might be relating to
Ah,
some of what Ocean is sharing as someone who is moving in somewhat unexpected, but also totally not surprising at all directions as far as your journey and what you're offering in the spaces that you create for folks. As a participant, I am aware of what it's like, but and I feel drawn into the setting, Ocean, as you're describing it. And I'm also thinking of the setting, Sabrina, that I've seen but have not yet participated in that you've created.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I've been like since since before the beginning of the year, been really called to the drum, and I
ah,
couldn't quite figure out what it was. First, it was like a man in my life, and I was like, there was some connection there, and then it was a woman I'm working with who's in the healing space, and now I just like feel so called to introduce drumming into the work that I'm doing with sound, which is really quite amazing. And I think there's always a little bit of a thread of connection to the practitioners that we are talking to, because we're all in the healing space, and like we've been exploring, there's this winding journey that says at some point something said to us we needed to do something different, and
yeah.
for some of us we just really didn't listen to it for a really long time. We weren't ready, our trauma was blocking us, whatever the case may be. So yes, as you were explaining that, of course I'm thinking there's I'm actually, I had the thought of like, can you explain a bit more background on the drumming, the sound,
Mhm.
what those experiences in circle and community offer to people? Because I think there are a lot of listeners who maybe have dipped their toes into spirituality and are hearing these conversations. But, I think when I first was like, okay, I'm going to go to this ceremony in the woods in this yurt, I also was met with some resistance, both from myself, from the conditioning, and from people who are like, you're going to fucking do what? Right. And so perhaps even the people who are questioning whether or not this is a call they want to answer, you maybe give them some insight on what it does, what it helps with, why.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I mean, there's so much there in that, just in that
So
question. Yeah, no. And again, these are simply tools, right? So I want to say, like, trust that calling. There's a reason, and you might not know what that reason is, but there's something in there for you to discover, whether it is a ceremony in a yurt in the middle of the woods, or whether it is a sound journey at a sound bath at a yoga studio, or whether it is a private breath session, or whether it is like yoga even, or these are simply tools to help us be more in connection and in contact with the body, with my emotions, with and it's just a place where we can actually pause a lot of the external stimuli and come inward. And I think the other piece that I was going to say around that is that these tools actually were cut off a number of generations ago, and that's a whole other tender place that I don't think we'll go into today. But just knowing that for me, and I appreciate you mentioning the word spirituality, because that's a whole lot of that's a big word, and I think for me, I think spirituality is my relationship with myself and my relationship with the earth. And so that's wide open. I get to create what spirituality means for me, I think. But a number of years ago and a number of generations ago, these rituals, ceremonies, practices, songs, even chants, the drum, there was this piece that got removed from from our culture, I want to say. And again, that's tender territory. But regardless of what our beliefs there around all of that is that there's so many people that I work with, that I've been talking to, and that I know are out there, that are just like, there's got to be something more. there's got to be something more to life and to this experience. And like, you know, and it at one point it was very much embedded into our culture. It was very much embedded into many all cultures, I want to say. Even just gathering in circle and storytelling, that was our primary form of contact, is gathering around the fire and storytelling and songs and all these things. And you know, somewhere along the line we started removing that. And so now that there's, you know, now there's this like piece that's just isn't quite fitting, or we don't feel like we fit in, or you know, all of these things. And so I think it's not so much embedded anymore. We actually have to go out and seek it. And for better, for worse, it is what it is. It's not good or bad. It's not right or wrong. Here we are. Right. And so I think that, you know, hearing that call is something that not many of us actually hear. And we kind of have to sift through the conditioning. We kind of have to sift through some of the traumas and our life experiences in order to find that, like, oh, wow, what else is here for me? So whatever it is, that calling, that hearing that you're curious about, my invitation is to really just stay curious about it. And that's something that I talk a lot about in my practice and in my breathwork teachings and trainings, is as long as we're curious about something, whatever it is, there, it's a good indication that our nervous systems are in a place where we can actually receive that information. And also that there's something there in this context, you know, following that little, again, breadcrumb. I don't know where it's going to lead. I don't know. But there's something there. And so these are just simply tools. And I resonate with it. And breathwork has been an incredible tool for me to you know, lighten my load a little bit, feel a little bit lighter in this life, and let down some of the baggage that I've been carrying from my birth experience, from my teenage trauma, and from my family dynamic, all these things. It's given me that space to recognize that that's a little heavy. So whatever it is, you know, breathwork isn't necessarily for everybody. Plant medicines aren't necessarily for everybody. But if there's curiosity there, there's a reason. And you know, whatever that is for you, I really invite you to stay with that curiosity and just, you know, follow that, because it's going to lead to another breadcrumb. It's going to lead to another piece. It's going to lead to another another place of self-discovery. And yeah, and I think that that's the most important thing that I'm learning, is that there's no real like definitive right or wrong. There's so many options now. So, you know, we have such a great privilege of being able to say yes and say no to certain things and certain practices and certain modalities. So I hope that answers the question. I didn't really get into a lot of like the how it helps, but I think that the curiosity is a great place to start in your nervous system. And it's like, oh, there's like, oh, what is that sound practice? And just to touch in on that a little bit too, I guess for me, I've recognized that breath is so fundamental to being in a human body. We breathe all the time. We breathe all the time. And as so much of that, you know, exchange with our internal and external world through the breath is subconscious and even unconscious. And so when we bring that forward to the conscious mind, it's a whole other world of self-discovery, and it's amazing. And same with sound, right? We are vibration, we are frequency. And so when we lean into these pillars, there's so much information, wisdom, teaching that's there. That is, it comes through so differently for all of us. But there's so much there that I can't say enough. I'm so passionate about it because it's so fundamental. And these are pillars to the human experience that, and even with plant medicines too, whether it is psychoactive or not. I've been working a lot with rose and a beautiful plant called bobinsana. And these two plants they're so incredible, and they're non-psychoactive. But when we can actually slow down a little bit to to learn from these plants, wow, like, wow, it is, I can't even speak to it. It's very personal, but there's a lot of wisdom there. So I'll stop there. Thank you for letting me go off on that tangent a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm a little bit curious to know, one of the cool benefits of participating in a sound bath at, say, a yoga studio,
Mhm,
especially for people who are already familiar with being on the mat, but maybe haven't been exposed to sound bath.
mhm,
Even for me, it's very few times that I've had the privilege of receiving that medicine. When you are exposed to the sound and you are already quietly within your body. Now, I know that there are folks who go to their yoga class and they get up as soon as it's time for savasana because, they've got things to do.
mhm,
And there are also a whole lot of people who just melt into those few minutes that are all theirs as a reward for their efforts. And we practice feeling into our body and letting our body rest. So when you're in an environment like that, and there's exquisite instruments being played, there is so much to be curious about.
mhm,
And it's quiet and still in your being. So you actually have an opportunity to observe.
mhm,
What is it that I'm thinking about? Or why does this particular instrument make me have a different feeling than this particular instrument? And two that we hear about often are sound baths and drum circles, which can have shared characteristics and at the same time are so very, very different. I wonder if you might speak to, is there different intention for using a circle of drums, which of course, I mean, the sense of community that invokes is one thing. Sound bathing maybe is often not as collaborative.
mhm.
I'm just curious if you would tell us a little bit more about those.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. I actually just came from last night. I have my monthly song circle with women with womb carriers, and so I have rattles. I don't necessarily have a large collection of drums, but there's such a beautiful thing that happens when we actually come together to participate in song sharing or rattles or drums. And just to touch in on that too, that with your interest with the drum, Sabrina, that it's very in the bones, it's very in the blood. And so again, if you're hearing that call, there's reason for it. There's medicine there for you. And a lot of the indigenous practices or understandings of how powerful and how potent the drum is like when we're in the womb, that's actually the heartbeat of mom is actually one of the first sounds that we hear and feel in the womb. And so in a lot of the drummings and the chantings and things like that, we're actually, dare I say, like brought back even subconsciously into that safe, warm, held space of, hearing that heartbeat of mom. And so it's very in our bones, it's very in our body. We know the warmth, the comfort, the safety. For most of us, not everybody has that experience in the womb, unfortunately, but there's something that we can tap into that is very soothing, that's very calming for the nervous system, and in the heartbeat of the drum. And even with the drum, even with the fast pace and the heightened energy and all this stuff, there's something that we can resonate with. Again, when we come to circle and participate, we get to come together and share in that collective experience and drum together. There's so much in that collective experience. It's really, really beautiful. And then alternatively, kind of similarly, but on the other side of that, when we drop into a sound bath or a place where we get to receive some sounds and vibration and different instruments, drumming or chimes or things like that, it's a totally different experience, but it offers nervous system just a chance to pause everything. Again, when we live in such a fast-paced world that's like do, 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 there's a saying that's actually, I was going to mention when you said that, what is it? If you think that you don't have time to meditate for 10 minutes a day, meditate for an hour. And I say that for everybody that misses shavasana at the end of a practice, or that hasn't experienced an hour even of a sound journey or a sound bath. It is kind of an antidote. First and foremost, it's kind of an antidote to the culture, this very busy, fast-paced culture that we live in. And so it's really important for the nervous system to kind of come down a little bit and move at a different pace for many different reasons. But it also gives, again, that possibility to come into a mindful state and receive. And there's so much of even about that practice of receiving that sometimes I have a difficulty with even. And so even just that practice of receiving can be so nourishing for a lot of us. And it's a practice, right? The more that we come into these spaces and drop into a mindful state, the more that there is this receptivity to the subtle ways that the mind wanders, into different stories or different thoughts or images, memories. There's different ways that our body responds to the different sounds and different instruments, just as you were speaking about. And it's all information, right? And I speak a lot about this in my one-on-one sessions and in my group sessions, that all of this information it's not good or bad, it's not right or wrong. It's just here for you to actually be with, to receive. And so there's, again, this practice of receptivity is so important in this fast-paced culture of doing. Can we actually practice the balance and the equilibrium between the doing and the being? And I think the sound journeys and the guided meditations or yoga practices or all the other plethora of different ways that we can be supported in this balance point of the doing and the being. I think there's so much there. There's so much there. And I think it is so important for us humans, just generally across the board, to have those spaces, to have access to the spaces, to create these spaces for ourselves where we can pause, where we can receive, where we can just notice. And because so much of the busyness and the fast pace is actually bypassing all of this information. Yeah. Yeah. So I want to say that's one of the main things, one of the main reasons why I offer what I do and create these spaces, is to be a bit of an antidote to the busyness and the the to-do lists and the all the things that we have in a day, right? It's like, oh, okay, we need to balance that out a little bit and come come to a place of pause or mindfulness. And then of course the questions become like, what is my body needing right now? What is my heart needing right now? What is my organs, my digestive system? What is, how can I offer good, high quality, nourishing places and food and friendships and connections? It's like if we're not tuning into that information, we're just going along, and then we start to notice like, oh, this discomfort in my body is kind of getting a little bit louder, and then sickness and disease. And yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that our body says, okay, I can't actually hold this anymore. Yeah.
And isn't it how beautiful how the quieter we get, the louder the body becomes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. Thank you. Yeah. It's also a way of befriending, like befriending the body, befriending the heart, befriending the nervous system, saying, oh, thank you. Like, I hear you. So much of this work is actually just like, wow, I hear you. Thank you.
I think a lot of us who are experiencing physical discomfort
Mhm.
view the body as fighting against us.
Mhm.
Right? Especially, you think about autoimmune, right? And how science describes an autoimmune disease. Well, it's attacking you from the inside. And that language itself is it's such a negative vibration.
Yeah.
Right. And I've learned that in my own healing journey. It's like, actually, the body is not attacking you. The body is giving you these really beautiful signals.
Yeah.
And it's just, we're not attuned to listen to it. We're not
Yeah.
only not attuned to listen to it, we're programmed,
Yeah. And
not
conditioned. Yeah.
conditioned
Yeah.
to listen to somebody else and take
Mhm.
their medicine or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
And getting quiet helps you start to listen.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And there's some incredible people, human teachers, doing some really incredible work in the antidote to that, Gabor Mate and Richard Swartz system, internal family system work and parts work and all this stuff to actually discover and explore the language of the body. These people are doing some really incredible work to support the nervous systems to be heard, be seen, and just be what they have to share with us. The nervous system to be brought to the table to say, "Oh, you're actually on my side." I
You're
just need
actually
to,
human. You're having a very human reaction because
yeah,
we are beings who are designed to survive.
yeah, exactly, exactly. And then on the more subtler side, we have the plant medicines and the drumming, the instruments that are here to support us in tuning inward and receiving the information from the body and the nervous system as well. So yeah, it's much more subtle and it's a practice to actually receive the subtle strings of information that come from those teachers. But in combination, wow. Yeah. And my body is actually doing a lot of shaking and shivering right now, and that's I've learned and that my nervous system is saying yes.
Your confirmation that
Yeah.
yes, yeah, love that.
Yeah. We're
And
touching in
that's
on
why
a
we
lot.
have to have video. So you
Yeah.
can see all of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the nervous system is like I know that we're touching in on the truth and a really beautiful conversation when my body starts going, yeah.
I love that. I love it so much.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Mhm. So thank
What I
you.
really like, Sheen, I know you have a thought, so I'll put this out there first. But what I really like about this last bit of the conversation is you, I think without even knowing it, like really tied it all back together of what we talk about in this podcast a lot, which is alignment, right? And what you said is listening to the body in all of these different areas, really explored without using the word how we connect to our values. Right. And it's sort of listening to the peripheral sounds and feelings within the body to go, okay, am I actually in alignment?
Mhm. Mhm.
It was very lovely how you did that.
With the time and space to acknowledge and actually feel into what's not feeling quite right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. A couple of thoughts occurred to me, Ocean, when you were sharing with us that one, it's almost cliche now to talk about mind, body, heart connection. You can add spirit into that. And we're so heady, and a lot of our society in Canada and North America, we really prioritize the headiness and the intellect and the capability to generate valuable thoughts, which there's this whole arrogance, right? This is where my ego lives, obviously, because it hasn't occurred to me before that all of those parts of ourselves and the external forces and elements that are with us, we are really all one team.
Yeah.
We are all one team, but the thinking part of us isn't very good at passing the ball. Just assumes nobody else is going to be able to make it down the field. I need to run this to the goal line. But to pause and recognize we are a team. And so finding those quiet spaces or opportunities to get out of the head and more into the body. Athletics is probably so much more meditative than they actually acknowledge, is simply because of the medicine of movement. Yeah, now I'm going to start thinking about my team a little bit more, a little bit more.
Awesome. Yeah. I think you touched in a little bit of, I want to just sort of connect that to internal family systems and that practice, that modality of getting to know all these different components of the human experience and being in a human body, and recognizing that the mind, the thinking part, has an agenda. It wants to understand. That is its primary focus and agenda, but it has a very specific way of needing to and wanting to understand, which is fair. It's necessary. We need to have that part just as much as all the other parts. But, when that takes the wheel 90% of the time, right, then we're actually not giving space to the emotional intelligence and the sensing intelligence and all these other different components, right? And then, of course, through life and through experiences, we have these other parts that come up and start to feel like they need to protect or feel like they need to manage, and all of these pieces. And so that's a very specific sort of lens to recognize that we can actually befriend, we can bring all these parts, all these aspects of our experience to the table. And yeah, recognizing that the mind it's a very powerful it's a very powerful component of the human experience, but it's not the whole picture. And so sometimes it actually takes the pause. Sometimes it actually takes the actually speaking to the mind, saying, thank you. Right now, I can't live in my head. Right now, I can't actually access these deeper layers of information with you taking the wheel. So I'm just gonna say thank you. I love you. I'm just gonna ask you to pause for a moment so that I can just feel what it is that I feel right now, and give that space to be acknowledged, to be seen, to be felt, to be loved, to be welcomed. Oftentimes I see it, coming out of a breath session as an example. People are starting to go, what just happened here? And I'm like, just a reminder, don't think about it,
Mhm.
go for a walk, journal about it, move your body, don't think about it. We're accessing different layers of intelligences and different layers of the body. And of course, again, like, it's very clear when, when the mind goes, but I need to understand this. And I'm like, that's not, yes, okay, I recognize that part is coming online. It's oftentimes, with a lot of this work, we can't actually understand it with the mind. Right? It's such a powerful force, and it's necessary, but it's definitely not the whole picture. Yeah.
I find that funny because I find sometimes I do try to intellectualize it through journaling
Mhm.
after breath. I'm
Yep.
like, what happened? Okay, I'm going to write about it. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going to make sense of this. I'm going to make sense of that. So now I don't journal at all after. And I do question myself, is this counterproductive that you're not actually like writing it out and like sitting with the feelings? But I do in my own way. I just do it in a way that I don't have to like force myself to write it out. And then I end up in my head. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's a balance point, right? I think the journaling can be a way of just getting it out so that you
Yep.
don't have to keep the hamster wheel going. So it's helpful, but once that feels complete, then put it away and take a breath or move your body, go for a walk, connect with a tree. There's different ways that we can integrate. And yeah, I think
it's
that,
also helpful to share with people the awareness of how wired our brains are to distrust the body, because
yeah,
what came through when you were talking about that is how many times I will speak with clients and then I thought, okay, well, I went through the same experience when I started to learn to trust my body, where it's like you have to literally it has to become such a consistent practice,
yeah,
because you'll come back to that same place. Well, but my mind is doing this, but I'm thinking about this. I can't stop thinking about it. And you're like, nope, come back to the body,
yeah,
come back to the body
yeah,
over and over again until
over
it
and over again.
becomes the pathway.
Yeah. And that's getting into like the neurological process, I think, too. And I don't have a lot of scientific language around it, but working with psilocybin in particular, I've learned enough about that medicine to actually recognize that that is a very carved out path in the brain that says, I need to do it this way because I've done it this way for 42 years of my life, and this is just the way that we do it. And sometimes we actually need to move what is actually known as the default mode network to actually be able to open up our brains to say, oh, there is another way of doing this. There's another way. So, but again, that's where the practice comes in, is like, oh, I'm catching myself, and tracking too. That's a whole other conversation and a whole other practice that I talk a lot about as well. But once you start to recognize that you're in that very carved out pathway, neurologically and habitually, ritually in our lives in the brain, we actually we actually get to then say, okay, here I am again. Come back to the body. I'm practicing carving out new neural networks and pathways in the brain, and that's the way to do it, is just coming back over and over again to a new way. And that's where a lot of psychoactive substances can actually support us, is in that work of moving beyond or underneath, however you want to understand that, what is known as the default mode network. Paul Stamets, a mycologist, talks a lot about that in his work, that piece around, oh, okay, like I recognize that this is a very ingrained belief and habit and, way of being. And so the practice is, like you say, over and over again, coming back to my felt sense. What am I feeling right now? Like, I love you, I love you, I love you. But what is my body saying right now? Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting story on that theme. I have been microdosing psilocybin for the better part of almost a year and a half, I think. And there have been some miraculous changes in my life. A big one for me is I used to have a nervous habit of chewing the inside of my mouth all the way around, tongue, cheeks. I would get small but loving lectures from the dentist every time I saw them, and I had a bite guard to wear during the daytime and a heavy duty night guard to wear at nighttime. And sometime around 8 months ago, I realized that I was not chewing the inside of my lips anymore. And I remember for a period of time noticing, okay, going, the pattern, but as soon as I caught it, I could just gently, oh, sweet girl, we don't do this anymore. Oh, right, we don't do this anymore. And then there's a softening, and now it feels strange. There's got to be something funny that needs my attention in there before I even run my tongue around the inside of my mouth, let alone I'm scraping my teeth on it. So psilocybin really does have this ability to help us more easily, in my case anyways, because I tried everything to not do that, and I would end up instead picking up my fingers, or the energy would go somewhere else, whereas that whole energy around it has, I would say, not just shifted, but had said, okay, she doesn't need this tool anymore, and so it's gone. And I'm more likely now to notice if I start to do something that's not kind to my body, and even having the ability to notice it more quickly, and then to choose instead, oh, sweet being, I don't need to do that. I don't need to do that. But it feels kind of like a superpower, because I hadn't been consciously trying to make, I have this bad habit, I need to change it. That had been my story since I was teased about it when I was in primary school. And it was just part of me that was part of me. And I noticed over time that it had fallen away, that there was a new program there. And that's just one example. I'm sure that there are many of us who could talk about what seems sort of magical, but again, very different medicine than the prescriptions that I was on to numb the anxious energy, in which case feeling just kind of foggy all of the time, whereas now I'm clear and I can celebrate these new pathways, and really love the proof I've been thinking about this. I have other, what do we call them, Sabrina? They're not crutches. They're not really companions, but you know, those things that we like to rely on every once in a while just to make life a little bit more soft.
Yeah. Like a nervous switch, I guess.
Yeah.
You don't have to label them as a medical term, but yeah.
No, drug
A
of choice
coping
is
tool,
actually what
really,
came to
is.
mind. I remember you using the phrase DOC, and I was, yeah, DOC, what's DOC? Oh, right, drug of choice. But they aren't necessarily all, you know, drugs that I ingest, but
It's
just
just
those.
a tool. It's a tool that you use to cope with that subtle
Yeah.
level of anxiety that is present for you or was present
Thank you.
for you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to the conditioning of your nervous system, probably as a child. That's part of your needing to be hypervigilant.
Yeah, exactly. I see that often. I see that myself. I was going to mention too that I used to be like a picker, you know, of my nails and my skin around my nails, to the point where I was bleeding and sore for many years, many years, and kept hearing from my mom and my uncle who has the same habit, and people around me and all this stuff. And I started getting quite self-conscious about it. But it wasn't until I started tracking. It wasn't until I started noticing, oh, here I am again. What am I thought? What am I thinking? What am I nervous about? What am I anxious about? What am I trying to process that I can't actually, like, I don't have answer, you know, like that's actually what the foundation of it was. And then of course, okay, when did this first start? And what was happening in my life at that point, you know? And all of this information started coming through. And then of course softening that, like, the piece of me that went so very quickly to judging and frustration, to that habit. I was getting very irritated, very frustrated with myself, that, oh, here I am, you know. But beyond all that, it was like you say, like, it was like a, oh, okay, you know, thank you, I love you, Ocean, for that part of you that's trying to figure things out and just can't, when it's this release valve a little bit. But you know, and I'm not perfect, but it's the practice, it's the process of getting to know those nuances of the subconscious ways that we release the tension a little bit in our bodies, whether we reach for something or whether we pick something, or whether we, you know, these habits that we form, there's reasons for them, you know. And so there's the curiosity and the forgiveness, or the even just the compassion for that part of me. It's so essential. It's so essential to that work. So yay, celebrating you for you know, letting go of that, because that's a big one.
Really big.
Thank you. Yeah, and to everyone who's find they're growing out of some of these tools. I love the metaphor of the release valve. That's exactly the essence of it. Is there's a lot going on in here. Just need to
Yeah.
Just to
let some of
titrate a
that
little
out.
bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So good.
Mm-hmm.
And as usual, I glance at the clock, and so much time has gone by. I feel like we could keep chatting and chatting and chatting. Sabrina, friend, is there anything that you might like to ask or anything like that before we start to?
I feel like we've covered so many things through our meandering path of a conversation that, as always, it feels really like just a nice way to wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Ocean, how about yourself? Is there anything you might like to share, or last thoughts that you might like to leave with our viewers?
I always, you know, just want to say thank you first and foremost to the two of you for having this platform, for, you know, people like me and yourselves for being able to share and have this work or this conversation reach the many different people that you do. And what's coming now is actually just thank you to all of the listeners for being alive at this time. I personally believe that in our soul's journey, we choose the bodies, we choose our lineages, we choose our lessons that we learn in this life, and that we don't need to get into that as a whole other
Whole other
episode.
conversation.
As a whole
Part
other
two.
episode. But I just wanted to say, you know, this is a really difficult place to be on planet Earth, you know, and just generally speaking, and I want to say especially at this time. And so thank you for being alive and for being on this path in whatever way you're on this path. And
Yeah.
you're so beautiful and you have so much to offer, and you know, keep going in those difficult times that we all inevitably get to, of like, I need to give up. Like, you're doing a good job. You're on the right path, and there's reason for going down into the depths. And my prayer is that we can, yeah, all continue to support each other in those dark times. And there's a reason why you're here, and so keep breathing and keep doing the good work and allow it to ripple out. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Feels like we're closing with such a sweet little blessing and a little celebration of the ripples. That's exactly what we're hoping to create here, is a little bit of a splash, and then trust that the ripples are going to find their way to where they're meant to be. Yeah.
Totally. I trust they will too.
Such a sweet, curious conversation. Curiosity. Curiosity is the theme word. Yeah. Okay, friends. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next time.
Thank you so much.